So my dad, Maury de Klerk, was a pretty interesting guy. He was a fabulous engineer, actually designed quite a few things that are still in use today. The hydraulic lift that is used at any typical gas station that he actually designed was a young engineer for Chrysler and did it for one of the Dodge's houses.
He was an active sailor, started sailing catboats down at the St. Clair Sail Club where he was actually a Commodore there.
From what I hear, though that's before we were born, that he was absolutely unbeatable and would sail sometimes an entire season and not lose a race.
He moved up to Bayview and sailed on a variety of boats, I think primarily with Carl Ness on Happiness, which was a pilot at the time that they did quite well with.
He decided that maybe he could build himself a better boat than the Pilot, which was the hot racing machine of its day under the CCA rule.
He felt he could build a boat and design a boat that was better than the Pilot's.
So he built models in his down at his shop on Bellevue, towed them and tested them in Connors Creek.
They were approximately 3 feet long, and he used the Pilot as the control boat, and then he tested that against his various models.
Invented a pretty interesting machine that basically looked like a T coming off of the bow of a little runabout.
And what they would do is he had an arm on a pivot, and he would be towing the Pilot on one side and his model on the other side, and then they would shut the motor off on the powerboat, and whichever one glided forward he figured was the fastest one.
And then actually even did it with some testing with yaw and sideways forces and things like that. And the long and the short of it is he thought he had a boat that was better than any of the world's best boats at the time and commenced to build it.
And he built it sort of every night. That he'd leave work at 5 o'clock, he'd work till 10 o'clock, 12, 2 in the morning each night building this boat. I remember as kids driving over on our bikes and bringing them a thermos of coffee and dinner.
About halfway through, Carl Ness and his son Peter jumped in and helped him finish it up.
And when Carl came in, it was great because it was an infusion of some money, and Carl's a pretty talented guy himself. He was in a foundry business, great engineer, and his son Peter got involved, and some of the other guys that eventually sailed on the boat got involved, and they polished the boat off quickly. The boat was built over on Lake Point and Charlevoix. He had a son named Randy DeVershi. I've forgotten the father's name, but they built it in their garage, which was a long garage, extra wide garage. And it was interesting, when they got the boat out of the garage, they actually had to build a door. It didn't exist. And then they rolled the boat down the alley on logs, and they'd pick up the back log and move it to the front. And once they got out of the alley, they were able to get it up on a truck and bring it down to Gregory's where it was launched.
The boat was just under 36 feet. And for its time, it was exceedingly low drag. It didn't have a lot of draft. And keep in mind that this boat was designed to win Mackinac races. My dad understood that it really wasn't important to be able to get that last few degrees of pointing ability to do well in a Mackinac race, that what you needed is speed through the water. This boat attracted the best of the best sailors in the Detroit area. In addition to Carl Ness and my dad, Peter Ness did the bow. No question, he was the best bowman in the area at the time. The navigator was Mike Tappert, who went on to navigate in most of the major races around the world and is a legend in his own right here at the club. Chuck Riley was young Chuck Riley, who is the better maybe known by today's members as the father of Dawn and Dana Riley, but once again a great sailor. Peter Lenz, Stan Davis, occasionally fill-ins from guys like Al Schultz. I mean, this was just who's who of sailing in Detroit sailed on the boat.
The racing record of Buffalo was really good, both in the Port Huron race and in the Chicago race. I think there was a 4-year stint where they won 3 out of 4 Chicago races, and they won 3 out of 4 Bayview races, and a couple of them were overalls on both sides. I don't remember how many overalls, but the boat was just phenomenal off the wind.
Typically, they raced on Saturdays. It would be common to either win all of the races that summer or Saturdays, or maybe lose one. So this was a boat that always won.
A number of people thought that that boat was so fast because of the hull shape. But in retrospect, if you look at it, it was the first boat with a big rig. It had a lot of sail area, and more sail area than any of the boats they're racing against. And like now, the wind doesn't blow very hard around here, and sail area is a good thing.
They just had it for just under 6 years, and sailed 10 Mackinac races with it between the Chicago race and the Port Huron race.
Flying Buffalo was sold to a guy by the name of George Downey, and George was a member of the Detroit Yacht Club. And George sailed it for a couple of years, and then he donated it to the Sea Scouts, who had it for a couple of years. And then the boat went to Florida, and I don't know where in Florida, but I do know in one of the hurricanes that it washed up on shore and actually ended up a couple of miles inland.
Now it has been completely restored by a fellow out in New York that's a superintendent in the New York school system, and the boat looks like new again.
Our son Matthew and myself 2 years ago went out and we sailed in a race that I think was called the Commodore's Cup, but it ran from the eastern tip of Long Island Sound out around Block Island and then back to the eastern tip of Long Island Sound. And we started out with a moderate air reach. We had a short beat to get up around Block Island, and then a reach down the edge of Block Island, and then a heavy air run back. And we were first in class and fourth overall. And for a while, it looked like we were going to beat boats like Far 40s and 1D35s boat for boat. They basically ground us in the last couple miles of the race. But boat's a phenomenal boat downwind still today.
I would like to, maybe before I finish up sailing Mackinac races, talk the owner into bringing it back here or letting me charter it, and maybe we'll sail it one more time.
About 3 years ago, we talked about chartering the boat and sailing into Mackinac, and Bernita came along, so we put that on the back burner, but I think Bob and I would love to charter that boat. The current owner is amenable to doing it. He's always wanted to go cruising in the North Channel, so he figured we could race it, and then he could spend a couple of weeks in the North Channel.